Greetings, gardening friends. This is, I'm not going to call this a how-to. I think I'm going to call it a how-done. Because I don't know if you'll get the same results. I'm kind of experimenting with this, and being Southern California budget gardener, part of my thing is experiments. Well, I'm looking at taking a vacation at some point, and I wanted to figure out how to water my plants, which are on my patio, and to sort of give you an idea. Here's, where the big planter is here. But then there's the edge of the patio, and if I'm going to have a neighbor help me water my plants, I don't necessarily want to give them access to my apartment. So I've got to figure out some way that maybe just to the left on the wall there, that's where the steps are leading up to my apartment. So maybe up in that corner I could put a container and let them just go up my steps and fill it with water, and then I would have what amounts to something like a drip irrigation system. So that's what this is. It's an old ice cream container. I got this at Walmart. I forget the brand name, but it's got the square container. Kind of an interesting thing. And then I went to the home center and I picked up 1/4-inch tubing for drip irrigation, as well as what they call barbed connectors. And this is a straight connector going right into the connector going into the container, and then part of the system also involves tees. So if I sort of trace it down, you can kind of see what I've done. But the basic principle is to get the water up higher than what you're trying to plant, and this was the easiest sort of shelf to grab onto. So I put the container up there. I drilled a hole in the bottom of it. I don't want to pull it down completely, but the hole, when I drilled it in, I had a choice of either going underneath and going straight up, or going from the side. And the reason I went mostly from the side here, sorry, went out of frame there. The reason I went mostly from the side was because this connector here actually has a corresponding part inside the container. And so if you think about it like a drinking straw, the closer you, when you drink through a drinking straw from a glass or a cup, if you don't put the straw towards the bottom, you don't get the stuff that's at the bottom. So here I had to sort of set this up so that it would drain as much of the water as possible. If I'd have gone from the bottom, it would have been sticking up that much higher, so there would have always been that much left in the bottom after it drained out. So anyway, that's the container, that's the connector, and then the tube comes down, and I just happen to have the tomato cage here for my tomato, so I kind of hooked the tube onto the tomato cage just to give it some support. So then from there it drops right down and comes into, actually this is, it's a loop of the system. It doesn't really matter, you don't have to have the loop. It basically came straight down, and then you can see it goes into a T. And so basically I use T's going along and then branching off of those T's to go into the individual planters within this large planter box, which is, the large planter box is actually, I'll put a link here so you can see how I built this box. But this is mostly for the irrigation, this video. So then the pieces that come off, they come off and they go right to the middle of each planter, or pretty close to the middle. And what I figured out through experimentation is something that I've seen in other videos, where basically what people have pointed out is that if you're going to try and do this kind of system, this is a lot like those aqua globes that you can buy, which are basically these glass balls that with a tail, and you fill them with water, and that tail has a point and a very small opening. Well, what I did on the end of each one of these tubes is I used a barbed connector. Maybe I can actually show you that barbed connector. Sorry, I was standing up on my stairs to do that. Here is a barbed connector. This is the T connector. So you can see you push the tubing onto it and it kind of deforms, but then it creates a seal. Well, imagine that if you had a connector like this that didn't have a T, it was just straight through. I'm using those on the end of each one of these lines, and so that's going straight down in there, and so it's not as small maybe as the aqua globes, but there's a smaller opening. And the idea is basically, if the soil is already wet when you put it in, when you push it into the soil, then it creates sort of a seal, and the wet soil doesn't require any more water, so it swells up and fills that opening and plugs it so the water won't come through. But when eventually the roots will draw that moisture out of the soil, or some of it will evaporate, when the soil dries out enough, it'll shrink, that opening will become more clear and water can come through, but then the cycle repeats. The soil will swell up again and block the opening. So it's essentially a self-regulated watering system. If you put it into just dry soil to start with, it'll drain out your container pretty quickly, but then after that first time, it turns out, at least in my case, that it mostly plugged itself up. So here I am after an hour. Let me climb back up here. After an hour, this started probably about up here, and that's as much as the water's dropped. The blue tape was actually something I used so I could track during experiments. I just used a little blue tape, put it up at the level of the water there so I could see where it was, and then come back a little later and see how much it had fallen. So it seems like it's working. One other tip is if you do something similar to this, now on my large planter here, I have drain holes at the bottom, so you can see there's some moisture down there. I think that's left from last night's episode, last night's experiment, putting some water up there and having it run through. But if you have drain holes, it should drain out if it gets too much water. So I don't see anything draining out right now. It seems to be just very slowly feeding it, and we'll see how long that lasts now that it just seems like the further I go into the experiment, the more water I put in there and let that water trickle down and come through. The more I do that, the longer this seems to last. So if I get the system calibrated right, I might be able to leave for a week and only feed it so much water. Or at least maybe get a couple of days out of it if they're really hot days, and I'll just have a container over on that end of my patio to feed them. It'll have to be elevated above the level of this planter. But that's it for the... Oh, no, one more thing. I did want to point out that I basically tried to get these tubes running along the tube that's being branched off of, I guess you can call it the main line. I tried to keep that mostly level. So in the case of this particular planter, one thing I did, because it kind of wanted to bubble up right near the end here, is I went ahead and I put some, let me get that out of the way, some green painter's tape. Kind of blends in with everything. Maybe I should just cover all the tubing with green tape, then it won't look so ugly in the middle of my planter. But just basic painter's tape. I mean, if it gets wet, it's going to come loose. But that seems to have done the trick. I just tried to level out that main line. So that's it for this video. Hopefully this will help somebody.